engages more of you than, for example, watching a television show or playing a video game. I'm not knocking video games. They strengthen other qualities in you. They give you a capacity to use your motor reflexes, to react quickly, to make quick snap judgments. All those are wonderful things in video games. And with a book, obviously, you're not telling the story. The writer has already told the story. You're merely discovering it. But the great joy of reading is indeed that joy of discovery. It's the discovery of a story. It's the discovery of new words, new vocabulary. It's a discovery of new ideas, because other people think differently from the way you do. And you very rarely get new ideas out of a video game, but you do get new ideas out of good creative writing. And then, of course, there is the sheer pleasure of concentration. We always hear about kids today having a short attention span. Well, if you want to enjoy a good book, the process of reading develops and strengthens your attention span. So that's why I'm delighted to see so many of you here at a book fair, because a book fair shows, despite a few hands that went up and I said if there are people here who don't enjoy reading, there are a few, still the truth is that most of you are here because books matter to you. I wrote once in the foreword to one of my books that I think books are like the toddy tapper's hatchet. A toddy tapper uses his hatchet to cut through a coconut, and the fact is that a book is like a hatchet that cuts through the rough husk that enshrouds our minds and helps us tap into the exhilaration that ferments within. That is what it seems to me books do for us. And of course, for many people, even today, there is no greater pleasure than putting their feet up, the good book in their hands, and losing themselves in another world. To me, because I loved reading, I began to become a writer. When I was little, I was a voracious reader. My mother used to read aloud to me from the Enid Blyton Noddy books. Does anyone still read those? Any Noddy fans? Nodding? Yeah, there. My generation, yes, but anyone behind? No. Anyway, these are books about dolls in Toyland. It sounds silly, but the adventures were very interesting and very well written. And I started reading, my mother says, because she read so badly to me that I became impatient to read the book myself, so I grabbed it from her and started learning how to read. But I used to read a lot, and I read very rapidly. So one of the problems I had was that as a small child, I was an asthmatic. I was often struggling to breathe because bronchial asthma constricts the bronchoids in your lungs, doesn't let the air come in and out normally as it should for everyone. And so it was difficult for me to go out and play with my friends as much as I wanted to. And as I said, I couldn't just stay in bed and watch TV because there was no TV. So I read, and then I exhausted the books available to me because I had no older brothers or sisters. I only had the books of my parents or my own. And if my parents took me to a library to borrow a book, I read so inconveniently fast that I sometimes finished the book in the car on the way home. So when I reached home, I still no longer had a book to read. And that's why I began writing. Because lying in bed, struggling to breathe, you can't sleep, and at the same time, there's nothing else to do. And the one thing I understood was the joy of reading and the power of words. So I started filtering those myself. And some of my first stories were very derivative. They were very much like the stories I was reading. So I remember my first attempt, never published, was something called Solvers on the Trail. Why? Because Enid Blyton, the inventor of the Noddy books, had a famous series of books for children called The Famous Five and The Five Find-Outers and The Secret Seven. So again, like a little child who only knows that world, I invented the 6 solvers, except they were in India and they were solving mysteries in India. Mysteries, I'm sure, very much borrowed from the kinds of mysteries that Enid Blyton's characters were solving in village England. Now, it's a way of learning how to write, because the actual art of composing a sentence, trying to tell a story, trying to unfold a narrative, is best learned by doing. I've always believed that literature and writing are intimate arts, that the way you write, the way you express yourself in words is as much you as the way in which you speak or breathe or talk. And so, ultimately, though your teachers, I'm sure, are doing their best to teach you the basic rules of writing, ultimately, your style is your essence, it's who you are. And the best way you can find out how well you write, whether you can communicate effectively, whether other people look forward to reading what you've written, whether it's a letter or an email or an essay at school, is by actually doing it, by actually writing. So I wrote, and my father and my mother were very encouraging. My father was amazingly kind in getting my stories typed up so I could share them with friends and show them around. And what happened after that? When my friends started reading the stories and saying, God, that was exciting, or this should have been done that way, or whatever, I began to believe in myself as a writer. When I was just 10 years old, one of my first short stories was published. And after that, there was no looking back. I can tell you, seeing your name in print as the author of an article the first time, or a story, is the equivalent of that first bar of chocolate or whatever that you may feel addicted to, because you really want to keep doing it. That first ice cream cone, the first time you see your name in print. I kept wanting to keep writing. And I kept writing throughout my school and college days. I'd come home, finish my homework, and write articles or stories for publication. In fact, a lot of my teenage stories written when I was a teenager, but not necessarily about teenagers, have been published in a collection called the $5 Smile and Other Stories, which is a collection of stories that were written, all of them, before I even turned 20. So, the stories reflect a writer learning his craft. And I would urge you all to try, those of you who raised your hands when I said anybody wants to be a writer, the best way you can be a writer is to write. But in my view, the only way you can be a good writer is if you're also a good reader. Unless you read, and read widely, you will not have a good sense of what can be done with the written word, what others have done, how others have weaved their thoughts and their imagination into words for you. If you can see that and learn from them, then you are in the best possible place yourself. I didn't want to give you a long lecture because I agreed with the organizers that today my real job was to get you to interact with me by asking questions or making comments from what you've known about me and what they've said and shown you. I'm sure that some of you have things you want to ask me or to say to me, and I'd be very happy to react and have an interaction. Is that okay with all of you? Would you like to do that? Yeah? Okay, so who's going to ask the first question? There are mics going around? Oh, there's a line up there of people coming to ask questions. All right, okay.
Hello.
So you have to join the line if you want to ask a question. My apologies. Tell me who you are and which class you're studying in and all of that.
Good morning, sir. My name is Abhishek Sharma, and I study in GEMS, our own Indian school. I'm in grade 8. My question to you is that as the youth, we all have an idol who has always inspired us. So in your college and school days, who was your idol?
Ah, that's a very interesting question. I don't know if you all heard it. He asked in my school and college days who was my idol. And I have to confess, I didn't have just one idol. Maybe because my interests were fairly diverse. I had a number of idols, okay? So obviously one idol had to come from the world of sports, and I had two. In cricket, there was this player called Sunil Gavaskar, who as a young, well, I can't call him a boy, but as a young man of barely 21, he went to the West Indies, which then was the most fearsome test-playing country, with fast bowlers who would, just a few years earlier, had even broken the head of the Indian captain, Nari Contractor, and he had to go through life with a steel plate in his head because his skull was so badly cracked by a West Indies player's bouncer. And whenever India went to the West Indies, they always lost all their matches. And here we had Sunil Gavaskar going there in his first series and scoring centuries, double centuries, making a world record 774 in just 4 matches. And he became a hero to many of us. And then in tennis, there was a player called Vijay Amritraj. And Vijay was a player who, as a teenager, used to thrash everybody through a very bold and attractive style of play. In his heyday, he beat every great player in the world. I'm sorry to say, we've never had a singles player since him who could actually, you could assume he had a chance against the world number 1 or the world number 2. Amritraj beat the world number 1, beat the world number 2, but then he would go and lose in the quarterfinals or the semifinals to the world number 30. That was the problem. He didn't often get to the victories that otherwise he had the talent to get. But he was a terrific, terrific player, and he was my other sporting icon. And then when it comes to political leadership, my icon was and remains India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru. We're celebrating his 125th anniversary, birth anniversary, on the 14th of November, just a few days away. And the thing about Nehru is not that I agreed with everything he stood for. I've written a book called Nehru, the Invention of India, which I've analyzed his legacy and what he's meant to India. And I've argued that there are some things he did that were great and some things he did that were not so great. But the most important thing, in my view, that Nehru did for India was to keep us democratic. We often forget today, because we now take our democracy for granted. We're used to seeing governments changing with elections, whether in Delhi or in the States. But what Nehruji did was to ensure that at a time when many other newly independent countries which had been colonies often veered into dictatorship because the leaders said that that was the only way they could keep their country together and to direct development in the country, Nehru was such a convinced democrat that he insisted on respecting all the democratic conventions. So, for example, Nehru would, at one point before independence, he authored an anonymous attack on himself, saying we shouldn't let Nehru get too many ambitious ideas, we want no Caesars. And later, Nehru, when he became Prime Minister, made sure that he paid respect to the President, the Vice President, the judiciary, the opposition. The opposition was very small in those days. But he would go, he would sit in Parliament, he would listen to their criticisms and attacks, he would respond. He felt that by showing respect for the institutions of democracy, that he would encourage Indians to believe in the institutions and not just in individuals. For example, when he once lost his temper and made an unkind remark about a judge at a press conference, he wrote an abject letter of apology to that judge, and then he wrote another letter to the Chief Justice of India apologizing for having insulted the judiciary. Now, this is the Prime Minister of India, the most powerful man in the country. Nobody to challenge him. But why did he do that? Again, to make the point, we must respect the institution of the judiciary. And this is how, to my mind, we should all be. Young Akshay talks about icons and idols. You can have people that you respect, but please remember that ultimately it is not the individual, but the institution that you must respect. You may like a prime minister, but respect the office of the prime minister. You may like a movie star, respect his acting abilities, realizing you know nothing about his personal life. The institution, the function, the role, when we learn to respect those things, we become true democrats ourselves, and that's one of the things that Nehru taught us.
Good morning, sir. My name is Karanveer Singh and I'm from the DPS Sharjah.
What's your first name again?
Karanveer.
Garveer.
Karanveer.
Karanveer, okay, good.
My question to you is, what gave you the inspiration to combine Indian culture and politics in the Great Indian Novel?
Okay. The Great Indian Novel is a book I published in 1989. So in fact, Penguin India has just brought out the Silver Jubilee edition, the 25th anniversary edition of this book, which means that people are still reading it. And I'm delighted that a new generation of readers is appreciating what I've tried to do. What I've done with the Great Indian Novel is to take this ancient epic and retell it as a satirical story of 20th century India, from the British days to independence and after. Now you ask me, what led me to do that? Well, the Mahabharata itself, which is why the title of the book is The Great Indian Novel. It's not an estimate, my estimate of the contents of the book. Great is Maha and Bharata is India. So the Great Indian Novel is a direct allusion to the Mahabharata. But beyond that, what have I tried to do? The Mahabharata was an epic that was told and retold for centuries in India. From roughly 400 BC to 400 AD, for 800 years, the Mahabharata and the tales of the Mahabharata were the tales that were told in all parts of the country and were told so repeatedly that they became the National Library of India. That is, that every story somebody wanted to tell was incorporated into a retelling of the Mahabharata. And that's why there are so many interpolations, digressions, unconnected stories to the central story, because they've all been added at different times over 800 years, including the Bhagavad Gita itself was added and inserted into a retelling of the Mahabharata. So I asked myself, why did we stop retelling the Mahabharata? Why is it that after 400 AD, there are no new versions of it? And so I said, what would a 20th century Ved Vyas say about his time, the great events of his time, if he were telling or retelling the Mahabharata today? And that was what I tried to do. I did it in a satirical vein. And if you want to know more, and if your parents will let you come, I'll be talking about the Great Indian Novel in much more detail at 8:30 tonight. Thank you, Karanveer.
Good morning, sir. I'm Annie. I'm doing my final year degree from City College.
Tell me your name again.
Annie. It's Annie. Yeah. I'm doing my final year degree from City College International, Ajman. And it's a great honor and a wonderful privilege that you're here with us, sir.
Thank you.
What I want to ask is, so way back in your 13s and 14, 15, in your teenage, did you actually dream to become the politician or great well-known writer or something like that?
It's a question about whether when I was in my teens I dreamt about becoming a politician or a writer. The honest truth is no. I mean, writing, yes. I suppose I knew I enjoyed writing. I knew I was reasonably good at it because what I was writing was being published. But being a writer was something my parents never encouraged, because as good middle-class professionals, they said, nobody makes a living from writing. And in those days, there was no Indian full-time writer except one, R.K. Narayan, who wrote full-time and even printed and published his own books. Otherwise, everybody else wrote on the side while earning their real living from another job. So my parents said, you're good at school, you're good at exams, you better do that. Focus on that, and after you finish your homework, in your spare time, you can write. And that's the way I always thought of writing, thanks to them. As for politics, the answer is actually emphatically no. Because in India, again, the educated middle class of our country has a contempt for politics that I find rather regrettable. That is, as I was just saying, my parents would say, study hard, do your exams well, come first in class, go to the next level, get into a good college, get a good job. And it's the fellows who can't do well in their exams who will go into politics because they can't get anything better. That was the attitude of most middle class families. And the result was that politics was left either to that generation of families that had won the nationalist movement and their descendants, or the big Maharajas and Nawabs who had, if you like, their own areas where people would vote for them, whatever they said or did. And then there was this big gap between that elite and the very poor, ordinary, what the Marxists would call the lumpen proletariat, who got into politics because they had nothing to lose and there was nothing else they could do. That was the attitude of the middle class. So it would have been very odd for me, as a teenage son of middle class parents, to aspire to becoming a politician. We were brought up to look down on politics and politicians. And I want to tell you, I think that's a very big mistake. Because in a democracy, it is always democratic politics that affects our lives far more than anything else. It is politics that makes the decisions that change the nature of the country in which we live and that determine the future possibilities for all of us. What kind of career options are available, what kind of prices we pay at the market, whether we can travel abroad freely or not. All sorts of things are determined by the process of politics. So abdicating politics, in my view, was always a big mistake of the middle class. I realized that mistake a bit late in life, but here you are, I'm there now, and I'm fighting, I hope, for the right values.
Good morning, sir. My name is Abel. And
Abel.
Yeah. I'm from our own English High School, Sharjah, Boys Branch. And the question I have for you today is, during your time as an advisor in the UN for Kofi Annan, sir, what was your thought about India's relationship with other countries like Pakistan because of the recent conflicts and problems happening?
Well, I always had my personal views, but working at the United Nations, as a matter of principle, I was not involved in advising Kofi Annan on matters that had to deal immediately with India's interests. So when the India-Pakistan issue came up, if I said anything to him privately, which I did, it was private. Officially, in the UN, it would not have been considered appropriate for an Indian or a Pakistani to be dealing with India or Pakistan with the UN Secretary General. And that became a matter of some sensitivity because Kofi Annan had a very senior Pakistani as the chef de cabinet and me, a senior Indian, as his sort of right hand or one of his right fingers anyway. And that became, therefore, an issue where we were looked at with suspicion by the other countries' nationals. And we shouldn't have been, because certainly for me, I was a lifelong international civil servant. I joined the United Nations at 22, and one of the things I liked about the United Nations was the fact that you would sit around a table with people of a dozen different countries, and you'd forget which countries they're from, because your own nationality is completely subordinate to your role in the organization. So you won't say, here's a meeting with a Tunisian, a Ghanaian, a French woman, an American, an Indian, whatever. You'll think, oh, that's that smart guy from that peacekeeping operation, and there's that brilliant techie, and that woman is such a fabulous speaker. I mean, those are the qualities that came to the fore. And all of us worked for a common cause that basically had nothing to do with our countries. That, to my mind, was a big issue. So when I was working with Kofi Annan, I did not say or do very much about India's direct relationships with key countries. But as you may know, after I came back to India, I was freed of that restraint. I was indeed in the foreign ministry for a while, and I've published a book, Pax Indica, India and the World of the 21st Century, which is a book about, indeed, all of India's relationships. So if you're interested in more detail, go and grab Pax Indica.
Very good morning to you, sir. My name is Tharoor Prasad, and I'm coming from the Gulf Asian English School, Sharjah. So I would like
Shiva
to...
Prasad,
Yes. So we all know that time is of the essence. And despite being the most sought after politician on Twitter and then managing politics side by side, where do you find time to write such bestsellers?
Thank you. Well, I haven't been writing as much as I would like because there's so many distractions. Not so much Twitter. Twitter doesn't take up much time. I can often tweet in the car between appointments or whatever. But it's much more the life of an elected politician in the Lok Sabha. In Indian democracy, politicians have to put up with a lot of demands from the voters. Your life, your time is not your own, because the voters are the ones who decide what to do with your time. And they will come with their demands, and if you're not instantly available and responsive and willing to help them, then you can forget about getting re-elected. So it's that much more than Twitter or social media that has interfered with my ability to write as much as I would like to. Let me stress that as far as my own joy in writing is concerned, I've always been conscious it comes at the expense of other things. You can't have it all. And by the way, that's something all of you young people should know. You can't have it all. You have to make choices in life. To live, Kofi Annan would often say, is to choose. So you can choose to go off and watch a movie or play with your friends or just have a fun time, or you can choose to actually sit down alone for a couple of hours or 3 hours and just write something. If that's what you choose to do, that's a choice that you can make, but ultimately it's a choice you must make if you believe enough in all of these things. Maybe we could get them to settle down a bit.
Guys.
Good morning.
Guys, can we settle down a little bit? Too much distraction. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. My name is Albin Abraham. I study in grade 11. I am from International Indian School, Ajman. So from
strong supporters here.
So from UN Secretary, UN representative to a MP in the district of Trivandrum, Kerala. So as internationalist to a state level politician, so you have faced many of hurdles to become what you're currently now. So my question to you is that, when we think of current politicians, they all like to get from national to international, like more and more. What made you think differently to come from international to a state level?
That's an interesting question. It's never been quite asked in the same way. Well, on the international side, all I can say is that I went abroad as a young man to study. I was always interested in world affairs. I was very much interested, obviously, in India's place in the world, but also in the overall direction of the way the world was going. And I was, I would say, very fortunate, very privileged to have an opportunity to work at the United Nations at a very interesting time that began with all the great humanitarian crises of the 1970s, from the Vietnamese boat people crisis that I was personally involved in handling, right up to refugee crises in every part of the world. And then to be involved in peacekeeping at the end of the Cold War, which was an extraordinarily exciting and at the same time challenging experience. And having done all of that, I had the great opportunity of running for the top post in the organization. I came a close second, but as Groucho Marx would say, no cigar. The second was the end of that. And thereafter I felt I should not remain. Now, I could have stayed international, not at the UN per se, but writing, speaking, lecturing. I used to command a pretty decent lecturing fee from organizations and companies around the world. But that would not have satisfied me enough because I had never been motivated by making a living or having money in the bank. For me, what motivated me was having meaning in my life, was doing something meaningful every day. And so the opportunity to do something meaningful in my own country with my own people was, to my mind, a far greater satisfaction, even if it meant some financial sacrifice or some loss of comforts. There is no question in my mind that morally and in terms of my own sense of my place on this earth, my purpose for being on this planet, that I'm far more useful and far more satisfied in this form of public life. I'm not saying I'm entirely happy. I've had a lot of challenges, a lot of problems, a lot of difficulties, and I have generated a lot of resentment amongst people who say that I have come into this world that is theirs, and I've encroached on their space, and that has been a problem. But nonetheless, each day is a challenge, but it's my challenge, it's a challenge in my country, and that's what keeps me going. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. My name is Danny Rajkumar. I study in grade 11 in the Emirates National School, Sharjah. Sir, in your book, India from...
We've got cheering section from the Emirates National School, Sharjah.
Sir, in your book, India from Midnight to the Millennium and Beyond, you have put forth an argument about the importance of India to the industrialized world. But we find nowadays that the modern generation of India, especially the youths, are more likely to work abroad rather than in India, where they're provided with the finest education. Doesn't this affect the development of India directly in the long run? Isn't this brain drain?
That Indians, you feel, prefer to work abroad rather than work in India. Is that what you're saying? I'm not so sure you're right anymore. That used to be true for my generation. I have a friend sitting right here who also went and worked abroad, who was in college with me. So we have people from my generation all over the globe. And one of the reasons for that was that opportunities in India were few and far between. What honestly happened was that the number of choices you had for a profession after you left school or college was much, much less then than it is now. But today, I would not agree with you that the majority of Indians want to work abroad. The impression I get is that the majority of those who even go to study abroad come back, which was not true in the 60s and 70s, where a majority went to study and remained abroad. Today, many of them come back. And there are two reasons for that. The first is, of course, there is a recession in the Western world, and so the job opportunities in the Western world are less anyway. But second, and perhaps more important, is the fact that India is not the old India. There are tremendous opportunities, tremendous ways in which you can find fulfilling, modern, professional experiences in India. And that's why I think that people are coming back. I don't worry too much about the brain drain, because even those who went, whose brains were drained out of India, they have continued to support India, invest in India, start businesses in India, be political supporters for Indian causes in their new residences. So I think either way India has gained. Whether they've come back or not come back, India has been the gainer. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. I'm Gracie Udip from New Indian Model School, Sharjah. And my question to you is, India and Indians...
Finally, we have a girl. Good.
India and Indians in all its forms and shapes are almost the characters in your books.
Yes.
And you are a major portion of your life, you have stayed abroad. So how then could you relate India in such a passionate way? And now, how do you feel being a tree in the woods?
Well, I would argue that a writer doesn't actually have to be in a particular place to write. A writer really inhabits his head and the page, or the computer screen if he writes on a computer. And ultimately, geography is merely an address. A writer has to think about things that matter to him, because ultimately when you are sitting alone with that pen and that paper or that keyboard and that screen, it's only you, your words and the medium. It doesn't matter when you've shut yourself off whether the place from which you've shut yourself off is in India or in Dubai or in America, and you're sitting and writing about Sri Lanka. I mean, that's, if you know enough about it, care enough about it, and write with feeling about it, where you're writing is largely secondary. So you can have novelists, for example, writing about things they know and care about, but in a setting like a university campus or a writer's workshop that may be far removed from the actual place they're writing about. They understand the truth of what they're writing, and then geography is just a convenience. So yes, I'm passionate about India. I gave an interview many years ago, 30 years ago, in which I said, India matters to me and I would like to matter to India. I hope I've tried to put my feet where my words were. Thank you.
Good morning.
I don't think the sound is on, young lady.
Good morning. My name is Pratiksha Rao and I'm from Delhi Private School, Dubai. And my question to you today comes from the sphere of politics, as you're a politician alongside with being a writer. My question to you is, do you think dynastic succession still has a place in Indian politics? And where do you see dynastic succession in the future?
Well, it's a very important question and one that is very often misunderstood, this question of dynastic succession. That is, should a politician's son or daughter inherit the political mantle of the father or mother? And I think we all know that in India this is a widespread practice. In my own party we have produced several generations of leadership from one family. If you look next door in UP, the Samajwadi Party has one chief minister being replaced as chief minister by his son. If you look in Tamil Nadu, the DMK party's leader, his successor is his younger son. If you look in almost any of the regional parties, the Orissa Biju Janata Dal is led by the son of Biju Patnaik, the famous nationalist leader. And so it goes. It is a widespread practice, and indeed, it even goes down to the individual level, not just parties. That is that an MP passes away and the seat is given to the son or daughter. We've seen that with Sachin Pilot in Rajasthan. We've seen it very recently with Pankaja Munde, Gopinath Munde's daughter in Maharashtra, from different parties. But the culture appears to be the same. Why does this happen? Well, one answer is because our culture is very much like that. We all know that the sons and daughters of Bollywood stars become Bollywood stars. We know the sons and daughters of doctors or dentists become doctors and dentists, inherit the practice. We know the sons of businessmen take over their father's businesses. Why should we expect any profession to be any different? If you have a chance to take over the family business, you will do it. That seems to be built into the culture. The second factor, which is unique to politics, is that politics requires two things: name recognition and a support base, both of which are inheritable. I can't say that because I am a very good IT professional that my daughter should be an IT professional. She may just not have the talent for it. But a politician can say, my daughter bears my name and she also has the same support, whether it's caste-based support, geographical support, whatever, that I had. Therefore, my daughter should inherit my seat. And in politics, it works because the ultimate yardstick in democratic politics is the voter and the votes. So if these factors make somebody more electable than somebody else, the more electable person is always going to get the chance. And the real truth is that in Indian politics, very often the voter has chosen a dynast rather than a fresh face or a different face. And ultimately, the best sanction in a democracy against dynastic succession is if voters start rejecting people on the superficial grounds of name or caste or lineage, and instead voted for people on the basis of their work, their personal quality, and the performance. We are not yet there, but maybe one day, by the time your daughter comes along to address an event like this, she won't be asking the same question. Thanks.
Good morning, sir. I'm Rachna Malara from Arun English High School, Dubai.
Hi.
And I speak to you as someone who has lived for 15 out of 16 years outside of India.
That's true.
And my question to you is, as NRIs, what is our role in the making and breaking of Indian institutions?
Wonderful. Okay. All of you, of course, are NRIs. And that's... Now, you all know what NRI stands for, right? Right, non-resident Indian. But in my book, India from Midnight to the Millennium, I suggested that NRI could actually stand for two very different things. One is never relinquished India. People who've never given up the idea of India even while they have physically left India. And the other one for NRI, I said, is not really Indian. Why not really Indian? Because you've grown up in a different culture, with different surroundings, different assumptions, different values, even different habits. Whether it comes to habits of sanitation and hygiene, I bet you don't litter on the streets here, but when you go back to India, you don't think twice about throwing your litter out of the car window. Whether it's the languages you speak in here, the TV shows you watch, everything is different when you're in NRI. So I've said, is it never relinquished India, or is it not really Indian, or is it both? But I went beyond that eventually, and I've written about this at some length. I'll give you a short answer. The short answer is the non-resident Indians have become so indispensable to India's own success that now I say that NRI should be the national reserve of India, because they have become a resource for the country. You are all a resource for the country. In what ways are you a resource? Because, of course, your parents are sending money home. That's strengthening our foreign exchange position. That's helping your relatives. That's also enabling our economy to grow and increase the purchasing power of the recipients. Even during the recession, the quantity of Indian remittances kept going up. That was a wonderful development. Secondly, because of the support you give. In every country, you often support policy objectives that are sympathetic to India. In America, for example, the NRIs have become a very important voice for pro-Indian policies, and because they themselves have an influential vote and are influential donors to politicians, the politicians can't ignore these NRIs. And the third thing about NRIs, it seems to me, is that they do invest back home. They invest financially. Many of them who have money will buy companies, buy land. They invest back in India. It's not that they feel that India is the last place they want to invest in. It's always the first place they want to invest in. But they also invest emotionally. They invest their compassion, their caring. When you go to these Pravasi Bharatiya Divas events every year, it's amazing the number of people you see who've come from all over the world, just anxious to feel that sense of belonging, that sense of identification with their motherland. So for all of these reasons, I believe NRIs are the national reserve or the national resource of India. You asked how they can make an effect. These are the ways in which they are already making an effect. But you asked about our democratic institutions. There they can only make an effect by going back and living. Because when you are outside, you don't forfeit your rights. As an Indian passport holder, you have all your rights. But you kind of lose out to those who are back home fighting the good fight at home. Because when you're outside, you're outside. You're outside the window looking in. You're not inside. When you're inside, however, then through your vote, through your participation, you can make a big impact. And many NRIs who've gone back to India after many years abroad have raised the standards of public discourse in our country in many ways, because they brought their own expectations and their own standards to bear on how India should be expected to function. Just as Bollywood filmmakers are making movies more and more tailored to NRI audiences, our politics too is becoming much more responsive to the views of NRIs around the world. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. My name is Zahra and I'm from Al-Amin Private School.
What's your name again?
Zahra.
Sarah.
And my name is Zahra, and
Zahra.
I'm from Al-Amin Private School.
Okay.
And my question to you today is, being a writer and a politician, which one are you proud to be considered as?
There's no doubt about that one, because a politician, to my mind, is not a part of my being. It is what I do, whereas writing is a part of my being. I'm already an ex-minister. One day I'll be an ex-MP or an ex-politician. But I hope I will never be an ex-writer, a former writer. That writing is part of who I am. As George Bernard Shaw said, I write for the same reason a cow gives milk. It's inside me, it's got to come out. Politics is a passion. It's given me interesting experiences, good and bad. But if tomorrow I stop being a politician, I don't stop being me. That's the big difference. Thank you, Zara.
Good morning, sir. I'm Alfia, and I'm representing Victoria College, Sharjah.
Hi, Alfia.
Sir, I would like to know how, as youngsters, we can get into politics and change the entire story of India.
That's a very good question, because I think young youth is the right time to get into
Yes,
politics. To my mind, one of my mistakes was I left it so late. I came into politics when everybody around me had been doing it since their student days. Your challenge is that you're here and not there. So as a young person here, you have to follow the rules and laws of this country, and you can't suddenly become an Indian political activist while sitting in Sharjah. But once you do go back home to India, yes, you can make a difference, you can make a contribution. And one of the ways in which you're able to do that is by engaging with the political process wherever you are. If you're living in a village, get involved with the grassroots work, the problems of the villagers. See how you can, with your education, you can help them by being an interface between them, their problems, and the realities of the government. Because you have the language, you have the education. If somebody has a problem, needs an administrative help, you can read the forms, you can write, you can take them to see the government official, and so on. You can be very active just by being an educated young person. Second, because as a young person you have fewer responsibilities, you are able to risk your time, your energy, your sleep in devoting yourself to political causes, and that would be something really worthwhile. And third, it's when you're young that you make the experiments that determine what you'll do when you're older. If you discover when you're young that you don't have a taste for politics, you can leave it behind with no regrets. But if you leave the political life for later, and then you discover it's too late to get in, or that you can't really have the same kind of success you could have had in your 20s, then you have only yourself to blame. So my advice is, try politics young, go and see how you can make a difference to people's lives. If you have a political party or political leaders you like, join them and support them, and see how you can get involved in improving life.
My grandfather has been an MLA.
Sorry, your mic's off. I'll repeat it. Your grandfather's been?
My grandfather has been an MLA.
Has been an MLA?
Yeah.
So you have a political constituency you can inherit?
I'm from Hyderabad, India. So I have a very political, I love to be in politics. I want to help the people.
Wonderful.
And like my main concern is with the poor people. I want to help them get educated, and I want to make my India totally a true India, which it was before. A rich India with everything.
Good for you. I love that ambition. We all admire you for wanting that. So go back and work for it, but get a good education first so that you can contribute what you know and what you've learned to those who are less fortunate.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Afia.
Good morning, sir. I'm Nidhi, and I'm pursuing my BBA in Cromwell. And my question to you is, it's about one of your quotes. There is nothing as the wrong place or the wrong time. We are where at the only time we have. Perhaps it's where we are meant to be. So, sir, do you think this quote has a strong impact in your life as a politician as well as an author?
That's a good question. This is a line from a novel, not a work of non-fiction. It's a novel called Riot. And a character says exactly this, that no such thing as the wrong time or the wrong place. we are where we are at the only time we have, perhaps where we're meant to be. And I say perhaps because even as the voice of that character, I don't want to eliminate the possibility of free will. I'm Indian enough or Hindu enough to believe that destiny lays out certain possibilities for you. That often two people may work equally hard and one succeeds in a certain way and the other doesn't. And often the difference is explained by factors that cannot be rationally analyzed. There are opportunities that destiny gives you. But ultimately, I would insist destiny alone is not enough. You still have to make a choice. You can have the greatest horoscope or the greatest fate line, but if you go and stand in front of a speeding train, it makes no difference to your destiny, you're finished. There are some things where you make the choice. If you jump off a 30th floor of a building, it doesn't matter how good your opportunities were. So there's always, perhaps it's where we're meant to be. You could have been somewhere else. You chose to be here, and that gives you your anchored role in life.
I'm Salman from JSS Private School.
Hello, Salman.
And my question to you is, you've been writing since you were a teenager and even before. What is this thing, even today inspires you to write, and how do you, if you get writer's block, how do you go through it?
Well, I haven't so far suffered from writer's block, but that's because I have so little time to write that when I do get a chance to write, I write with a ferocious determination and energy. I think Salman Rushdie once said, why should writers be allowed the luxury of writer's block? After all, carpenters don't have carpenter's block, and engineers don't have engineer's block, and plumbers can't have plumber's block. They have to work all the time, and writers should be a profession. They must work the same way as well. So that's the answer, I suppose. I write because it matters to me. I gave you the George Bernard Shaw quote. It's like a cow giving milk. And when I write because I want to, not because I have to. And that applies to all of you, I hope. Write because you want to, and you will write things that will mean something to you and to your readers. Thank you. Last question. Okay, the young girl. What's your name?
I'm Malvika Rajesh from Rajgiri International School.
Hi.
So my question to you is, so you're an orator as well as a writer. So which one do you think will have a greater impact on the society?
Oh, that's very sweet of you. And it's a very difficult question to answer. Historically, the answer would have been the writer, because the oratory of any famous person is only heard by the audience around them, and when the speech is over and they've gone, that's the end of that. Whereas the writing will remain on the bookshelves to be discovered by future generations. But now we have YouTube, so even a good speech can be watched by later generations. I delivered a speech at the TED conference, I remember, where the audience must have been maybe 250 people maximum, 300 maybe. Today, that speech, that very same speech on YouTube, has been watched by 2.5 million people over these last 4 or 5 years. So yes, I don't know, but because if people are going to lose the habit of reading, then maybe speaking and being able to listen to speeches on the net will become equally long-lasting. But I have a bias in favor of the printed word, because I think you don't require an expensive computer and an internet connection to watch it. You can pick up a book, sit on a beach and read it and be influenced by the ideas. So my answer would be the writing. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thanks, kids. I'm sorry that it went on so long that many of you had to leave. But thank you for coming and for your very, very stimulating and well thought out questions. Appreciate it.
We'd like to thank the Sharjah government and the Book Fair authorities for giving us a chance to host the session, and of course Dr. Shashi Tharoor for taking time out of his busy schedule and talking to you guys, and of course all the teachers and students for being such an amazing audience. Thank you. There's a book signing session now, so all those who want can please line up here. Thank you.